And then there was a very small creative group that was supposed to come up with these 3 pitches and given 6 weeks. And we just sort of arbitrarily decided, like, let's spend 2 weeks on each pitch. The ground rules that I sort of led with is you have to be all in for the 2 weeks on the pitch. So if we're, pitch 1 was a Starcraft MMO, and we have to live and breathe and want it more than anything. And I kind of warned everybody. I said, at the end of this 2 weeks, you're going to think this is the only game idea, and you're not going to be invested in the next, but we're going to throw it out as soon as we finish it and do the next one. And the StarCraft MMO, I actually really loved that pitch. It was called StarCraft Frontiers. And the concept was like less of you're playing like Space Marine, like it was less armies. StarCraft, the RTS, is always about the 3 races and the giant armies. And kind of what made WoW and separate from the Warcraft RTS series was that instead of being like a footman in the army in World of Warcraft, you were like a lone adventurer, make your mark on the world. So we had this idea. It was this old Chris Metzen drawing of a space prospector. And I love that idea that like somewhere out in like where all the giant StarCraft battles were happening, thousands of Zerg and Protoss and Terran, there's like this like lone prospector on some planet, like going through like a mysterious dungeon, looking for minerals, but finding monsters. Like it was that kind of spirit of
That's awesome.
More on the ground level.
I didn't even think about that because my intuition with the StarCraft MMO would be the soldier as part of the army, right? The prospector. That's such a beautiful vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking for the resources and on the way finding the monsters.
You want to be on the ground, like what's it like on the ground floor? And I don't want to be a minion in a giant army. I want to be Indiana Jones in space,
Nice.
So then there was this Metzen picture of the prospector, and then 2 of the most amazing artists, Arnold Sang and Peter Lee. Arnold's the great character artist. Peter Lee's the great environment artist. They did this concept art for Frontiers that was Metzen's space prospector. He's smoking a cigar and he's got his foot on a Hydralisk skull.
Nice.
And then there's like a med vac in the background and they're on this like big alien planet. And like that picture, you just wanted to like, here's my money, I'll pre-order now, like sign me up for that game. That picture ended up being McCree from Overwatch. We redid it.
Nice.
But yeah, that was where McCree actually came from. So that was the StarCraft Frontiers idea. We kind of we went all in on the design. We had a world design, we had class design, like how the classes would work, what progression might look like, and you also have to think when you're trying to design an MMO, like what could expansions and live content be like. And we put together a really good pitch. We all knew there's no way you can make this game. Like this, even though it was more focused than Titan, it's 5 years on Blizzard's best day with nothing going wrong. In perfect scenario, 5 years to make that game. Probably with, 150 to 200 people. Like these 40 people are not making that game in 2 years. So as much as again, that was an idea, not a vision, because it lacked the path to reality,
Because that's a legit large-scale MMO in a world that you haven't quite developed in the way that an MMO needs. It was really crafted for the real-time strategy formulation of StarCraft, and it's in space. It would take. I mean, it would be incredible, but it would be 5 year and realistically even more.
Like an endless thing that you'd spin on that team. You're making the StarCraft game. How do you get from planet to planet? Is it a cutscene? No one's going to want a cutscene, but we should probably make it a cutscene because that's easy. But we got to have space flight. That you're adding like 3 years just by saying we got to have space flight.
You are, yeah.
And then how do you make a space game without space flight? we've all played them. We know those games. So
Are you essentially, when you're brainstorming like that, and by the way, it's such an incredible thing that for 2 weeks, you're just really falling in love with the game altogether and trying to figure out if it's actually possible. So if you're developing that, are you just constantly trying to say, like, what is the simplest possible thing we could do that's a complete world? Like, are you constantly trying to simplify, or are you allowing yourself to go big?
So when you're brainstorming and you're with the team and you're the creative leader, it's guys, what's fucking amazing? What's
Mm-hmm.
big? What do players need? There's a Blizzard design value called what is the fantasy?
Mm-hmm.
What is the fantasy? You want to be in space. You want to be in the Starcraft universe. And then your job as the game director, and if you have a great creative director, art director, tech director, the director should be scoping it back into reality. The mistake I see on a lot of game teams is scope becomes a production problem. You give it to the project managers or the executives or the producers to say, no, there's not enough time, or you guys should hire more. Because,
Right.
like, what what do those types have at their disposal? They can hit you with meetings in Outlook and tell you that you can hire more people. That's not really how you get the game made.
That's why they get paid the big bucks.
The scoping, your best case scenario is when your tech director, art director, and game director are doing the scoping.
Mm-hmm.
Because then like, this part we got to spend big bucks on. There's no getting around it. This part we can cheat. If you have a giant team and one guy's job is just to make props, crates and chairs, the guy's going to make that's a triple A awesome developer who's going to put his heart and soul into it. If you let him, he'll take 6 weeks to make a crate.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that moment where you're like, I kind of need 200 crates. So just spend like a couple hours on that one. And that's a hard thing to say to somebody.
You're doing this kind of scope carving while also talking about what is the fantasy. So
Yeah.
there's a tension there that you're constantly dancing with. So you're allowing yourself to think big, but then scoping it down and doing that on a scale of days in this case, like.
Yeah. We had 2 weeks. So, and I don't think I was working on weekends, but we weren't getting the group together. So it's, like 10 working days.
And then you like shut it off and go to idea number 2.
Yeah. Idea number 2 was Crossworlds. That was a Metzen vision for a universe. And like, I'm glad Metzen's back at Blizzard, and I hope they make this game someday. The way Chris described it was there's a planet on the edge of the universe that's like the Mos Eisley spaceport with all these, freakish aliens and people from all walks of life. And it's kind of
Nice.
seedy and criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's traders and smugglers and diplomats. But this one planet is sort of the planet that they've agreed to like meet on. And this is like the neutral place. And then the game was going to take place on that planet. So
This is awesome.
yeah, so that was more of like a world IP driven one that was really inspired by Chris.
And that allows you to play with different characters, different. I like that. I like that idea a lot because it's the meeting place of different worlds, and then you can allow your imagination to drive what the worlds from which they came from are like. So you don't have to design those worlds.
No, you don't have to design them, but then they're yours. Like if the players really are reacting to like the green people planet or whatever, and someday you're like, hey, what expansion should we make? I don't know,
Yeah.
green people
Green
planet.
people, yeah.
Like, let's do it.
I like it.
So it was actually it was Crossworlds. We were working on Crossworlds, and like the StarCraft Frontiers, for Frontiers, we were having the class meetings, how class progression worked, like the game designery stuff. And on Crossworlds, we were having a class meeting of like, a big decision in like RPG type games is always, are you doing like skill based or class based?
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually some combination of those. But class based, you're like choosing, I'm going to be a warrior, therefore I use sword and shield and I do these things. Where more of a skill base is everybody's kind of an avatar, and then the skills that you pick define. So I might take that I know how to use swords. So you're kind of making those decisions. And with all things game design, there's no right or wrong. It's all trade-offs. So the trade-off decision we were making is like, oh, I think we want to be class-based with this Crossworlds thing. And we were in a design meeting, and one of my favorite designers of all time is a guy named Jeff Goodman. He was one of the original WoW encounter designers. He designed like Onyxia and all the big raid bosses. Like if someone has a favorite raid boss, Jeff probably designed it. And he just kind of off the cuff said in this meeting, he said, I wish instead of making like 6 classes, I wish we could make 50 classes. And I wish instead of having like, 100 abilities on the classes, the 50 classes all just had like 1 or 2 things that was really interesting about them. And then the class meeting ended, like we designed our 6 classes in that meeting. And then the meeting ended and I was back at my desk. And it just stuck with me what Jeff had said about the way he wished he could design the classes. And then we had this directory of all the amazing Titan art.
Mm-hmm.
And I started pulling up Arnold Sang's characters. Arnold's vision and his art is second to none. And I started taking some of the old Titan characters that we had designed. We had a class called the Jumper. And the Jumper could like teleport forward and rewind time and come back. And the Jumper used dual wield pistols, which was at the time designed after my dual G18s from Modern Warfare 2 was my favorite loadout.
Uh-huh.
I was just cribbing Infinity Ward. That's where Tracer's guns came from.
Mm-hmm.
And we had all these like different guns, like some that bloomed and some that, had this like really crazy recoil. And we had other types of guns. And I took every version of like the Titan Jumper and I just distilled it into what I thought was the best version of the Jumper, which was, the dual wield pistols, the blink, the recall, and time bomb. And then I took Arnold Sang art and I went, to Arnold and I'm like, what if this wasn't like a class? Who is this as a person, not a class? And Arnold, oh, what if she's British and her name's Tracer? And like, that was the origin of Overwatch.